Mr. Chandrashekhar, thank you so much for joining us. So, first question, this seems to have been a difficult year for many reasons. One is some of the fundamental changes that are sweeping and perhaps attacking the technology industry, not just in India but worldwide. The second is the Trump factor, Brexit, the sense that globalization may not be the path forward. Your broad overview first, and then let me ask you some specific questions.
Yeah, very quickly, I think there are, as you said, two buckets to this whole change, which are qualitatively different and also in terms of the transience of the issues. So, the first is the technological secular trends, which have been around for a while and which have been, sweeping the whole technology world. And this is the advent of digital technologies, the SMAC, social media, mobility, analytics, cloud, Internet of Things, robotics, and the list is endless. So, all of those are making huge changes in technology and the way it impacts everybody and everything. And we are seeing that in our daily lives, and especially the younger generation seem to be faster adopters, although it is not an age specific thing, but just statistically they are quicker adopters. And in India, with a young population, obviously the adoption tends to be a little faster for that reason, if nothing else. And that has also brought in its wake a lot of changes in the way the technology business is done. We have had a global service delivery model for some time, and now with the advent of digital, which is not only changing the way technology is provided, but also the way technology and business are that admixture happens, and that there is nothing like a pure technology service anymore. It is technology embedded with business and the domain, embedded with consulting, because it has larger implications for the business. There is also a trend towards looking more at the outcomes rather than the technology inputs, which means that the kind of work that you do and the kind of risk sharing, all these have changed. So, without going into the details, what I want to say is that these technology changes have not only affected what technology can do, but also how it is provided and how business in this space is done. The second big bucket that I talked about is the political and economic shifts, which in a sense there is an interplay also between them. And these have been some huge seismic shifts like Brexit, the election of President Trump, which many people did not anticipate. And there have also been some less seismic but perceptible changes, like the economic slowdown in many countries, then the demographic shifts which are taking place, Japan being the prime example of that, and then the kind of currency fluctuations which are taking place, all of which are in some ways interlinked. So, those also do have both a direct and an indirect impact, because indirect impact because it does impact business confidence, it does impact the way people make investments in technology, it does constrain people in terms of saying, when I make this investment, it is a long term investment, but do I know what that long term is which I am preparing for. So, these two are impacting, and what we see is the resultant of all of these. So, when companies are looking at the problem, I think they are looking at this entire spectrum of issues, and it is not easy.
Right. So, one specific issue that you are currently perhaps battling with is H1B visas. I know that Nasscom has been trying to connect with its counterparts in America and trying to find out what the government could actually do to either restrict or contain H1B visas, which in turn seems to be a very critical component of India's, at least the American part of the export business. So, what is the next step there?
You see, the H1B visa, while it has hogged a lot of the headlines, I think we should also look at it with a certain sense of proportion. The number of new H1B visas which are issued to Indian companies is about 15,000 or thereabouts, maybe 15 to 20,000, somewhere in that range. And the number of people who are working in the industry is 4 million in India, roughly, a shade under that. So, it is not as if this is a be all and end all issue for the industry. There is no doubt that US being a 62% market share in terms of our exports, and that these people who work on site do have an important multiplier for the rest of the business in the US, because they interface with clients and so on. So, it does have an important impact. But the heart of the whole issue is that there is a skill shortage in the US. It is well documented by US government sources, etc. So, they are grappling with some of those challenges in terms of skill shortage, and in fact, they are better off because in some other countries they are grappling with a pretty serious unemployment problem and a shortage of high skills at the same time. In the US, the unemployment is pretty well under control. It is just a shade over 5%, which is not too bad. While of course, in the high skills area, it is 2%, which shows that there is a shortage, because anything under 4% is regarded as a shortage. So, therefore, in dealing with this issue, it is important that these perspectives are shared, because there has been a move in terms of the campaign rhetoric, in terms of some of the emotive stories that are built up in the media, that somehow all these people who are coming in on visas are taking away American jobs or job opportunities for Americans. The reality is completely different. The reality is that there are 2.4 unfilled jobs which require STEM skills, and they are not being filled because there aren't people. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And if you take IT and related areas, it is half of them. So, even if you take only IT and computer related jobs, it is more than 1 million jobs lying unfilled, as against about 15,000 people going.
So, the demand supply equation is clearly in favor of Indian engineers going abroad, and therefore, you feel that they H1B, at least from a demand supply point of view, should be, I mean, it should come to engineers going from here. But on the other hand, I think there seems to be a concern about foreigners coming to US, taking away jobs. So, I mean, my question is, what are companies doing? I think so. I mean, finally, it's the companies who, or the clients who actually bring engineers there or write contracts here.
No, as I said, when companies look at it, they are not looking at the H1B visa issue in isolation. They are also looking at the larger secular trends in the industry because of technology shifts. And they are also looking at some of these political and policy changes that come in their wake. So, if you look at the larger technology changes, those changes in terms of a shift towards outcome based, a shift towards more of domain and consulting, also result in a different mix of skills, different mix of people, different mix of on-site and off-site, because domain knowledge comes more when you are looking at people locally. So, those shifts were happening anyway, which were necessitating a higher degree of local hiring for certain kinds of skills, which were now entering the equation in a much stronger way than before. So, to some extent they were already making those shifts. Now, these policy changes which are being talked about are not looking at that whole complex jigsaw puzzle. They are just looking at it as people are coming in, impacting jobs, and put some constraints on them, which I think is a much more simplistic view than the reality.
And have you had any recent conversations with your counterparts in America?
Well, this is an area where, as you know, the industry, not only in India, even in the US, there have been concerns expressed, because it is the IT sector and equally the whole innovation ecosystem depends heavily on immigrants, and a very large percentage of innovative startups in the US have an Indian entrepreneur as a part of that founding members. In fact, in the NILF, one of the speakers had actually said it's as high as 83%. Now, I don't know whether that's the right figure, but certainly it's well above 50% for sure. So, if both the innovation as well as the IT absorption and delivery capability are adversely impacted in the US, then that is not good for the US economy, leave aside the Indian economy or the Indian industry.
Right. Okay. So, let me move beyond H1B. The overall growth projections for information technology services seems to be quite positive, right? We were talking about 2.6% growth, now we are talking about a 5% growth. So, it seems to me that the tide seems to be rising. So, if the tide is rising, how can that benefit, and could that in some ways counter all of this that we have spoken of till
Of course it will, of course it will, and I think that is the reason behind our high degree of confidence in within the industry, because the whole tide is raising all boats. And in that sea of opportunity, India is very well placed for several reasons. Number one, of course, we already have a reasonably well recognized track record across the world. It's well recognized the capabilities that exist. We have a young demographic profile for the country. We have a high number of STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics people graduating, and we have the ability to quickly reskill people. The industry has done that repeatedly in the face of earlier challenges. So, I think that we are better placed to take advantage of the opportunity created by the rising tide. But it is not simple. I do not want to leave an impression that there is anything automatic about it or that it is simple. A lot will depend on how well we tackle as an industry, as a country, the whole skilling challenge. And if we are able to do that, I think it is there for the taking. We have also seen that India's share has moved up at a steady pace. And therefore, I think we do not see any
India's share of global IT services.
India's share in the global sourcing of IT has gone up, and we are now at close to 56%, 56-57% in that range. So, net that has been a good story. However, because of the complexity of these challenges and the fact that this challenge varies from geography to geography, vertical to vertical, company to company, it all depends on how well an Indian service provider is able to read all of these and then position themselves to continue to realize the old traditional business to the extent it is there, but actually move as quickly as possible into the new digital space. So, what I am implying is that there will be a much bigger differentiation between the performance of individual companies, but the industry as a whole and India as a whole, I think the prospects are certainly extremely bright.
Right. So, last question, Mr. Chandrashekhar, what is your outlook and what are the 3 key challenges and tasks that you see for Nasscom in the coming year?
Our key challenge number one, I would put as the skilling challenge. The skills that are needed are not only huge, they are shifting rapidly and they require radically different approaches to deal with that skilling challenge and to be able to be very agile about it. We do not have the luxury of waiting 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We do not have the luxury of saying okay, these were the skills required for the last 5 years, let us plan for that. It is changing literally by the year if not faster. So, skilling is challenge number one. Challenge number two is the anti-globalization and protectionist forces which are rising across the world, and to be able to spread this message as to why it is important in the area of high technology to keep a sense of proportion and balance in dealing with the complex political challenges. The third is that as the nature of business is changing and people have to move from providing pure technology services to a mix of technology, domain and consulting, building that capability and building the same enviable reputation in that broader space as we did in the technology space is the third part of the challenge. And I think these 3 are the critical challenges for the industry.
That is a good note right now. Thank you, Mr. Chandrashekhar.
Thank you.
Thank you.